to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
It's GB News with Paul Hawkins and Alex Phillips. A very good morning to you. Later on this hour, we have the best of talking points with Nigel Farage. Before all that, let's get the latest GB News.
Thanks, Paul. I'm Simon Pusey. This is your news. The Prime Minister will decide today whether or not to impose fresh restrictions to try and reduce the spread of Omicron across England. Boris Johnson will be briefed on the latest COVID data by Chief Medical Officer Professor Chris Whitty. He'll also consider the current levels of pressure on the NHS. The briefing follows new measures being introduced in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland on Boxing Day. Professor Hugh Pennington spoke to GB News and says there's a lot of pressure on the Prime Minister.
Kind of mini lockdown, people haven't been doing the sort of things that they would like to have done anyway on their own bat, rather than needing, the government to tell them to do it. So there has been there have been many problems for the hospitality industry, and many shows have been put off or cancelled or postponed and that kind of thing. Anyway, and the need to do more is a very hard decision to take.
Quick warning that this next story contains flashing images. New restrictions on hospitality have come into force in Scotland to try and stop the spread of Omicron. Nightclubs are to shut and hospitality businesses will reintroduce table service only if serving alcohol. Social distancing measures will also return to bars, restaurants, gyms and theatres. Stephen Montgomery from the Scottish Hospitality Group spoke to GB News and says the restrictions are taking a toll on the industry.
It's a bit of a blow for us in a month that would traditionally give us most of our turnover, 30-35% of our turnover for the year, to get us through January, February and into March. And as well as that, it's the busiest time of the year. Hogmanay in Scotland is one of the biggest celebrations you'll ever see.
The Business and Energy Secretary is expected to meet with energy bosses later to address rapidly rising wholesale gas prices. The chief executives of major suppliers are likely to ask Kwasi Kwarteng for tax cuts and the relaxation of green levies. Many say they are paying more for gas than they can charge customers. Since the start of September, more than 24 companies have gone bust. West Mercia Police has formally apologised to the family of ex-professional footballer Dalian Atkinson over his death. The 48-year-old who played for Aston Villa died in 2016 after PC Benjamin Monk kicked him in the head at least twice and tasered him 3 times. Monk was convicted of manslaughter and jailed for 8 years in June. Chief Constable Pippa Mills said a police uniform does not grant officers immunity to behave unlawfully or to abuse their powers. The Metropolitan Police are investigating a video linked to a man arrested at Windsor Castle on Christmas Day whilst carrying a crossbow. The video obtained by the Sun newspaper shows a masked figure addressing the camera. Police say the suspect has been sectioned under the Mental Health Act. More than 165,000 workdays have been lost by Police Scotland due to mental health issues. The data, which was recorded between 2019 and 2020, shows that staff and officers suffered a range of issues, including alcohol problems, anxiety and depression. During that time, 68 police officers retired early due to mental ill health. The Scottish Liberal Democrats is now calling for annual staff surveys to identify problems more quickly and to provide support. The jury in the sex trafficking trial of Ghislaine Maxwell will resume deliberations today. The British socialite is on trial in the US, accused of luring young girls to be molested by Jeffrey Epstein. The jury last sat on Wednesday before breaking for the Christmas holidays. Miss Maxwell denies all the charges. And the director and producer Jean-Marc Vallée, known for Big Little Lies and Dallas Buyers Club, has died at the age of 58. The Emmy Award winner passed away suddenly in his cabin outside Quebec City in Canada. Mr. Vallée was acclaimed for his naturalistic approach to filmmaking, directing stars including Reese Witherspoon, Nicole Kidman and Matthew McConaughey. That's your news update. I'll be back in around an hour's time now. Let's return to Alex and Paul.
Good morning, you're watching GB News Live with Alex Phillips and Paul Hawkins. Up first, Christmas might have meant a well-earned break for you and millions of other people across the country, but meanwhile, thousands of healthcare staff are continuing Britain's booster rollout. While some people got jabbed on Christmas Day and Boxing Day, others have started receiving encouraging text messages about getting the booster. A rise in cases of Omicron is expected to follow the seasonal festivities.
Well, with more on this, our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis joins us live from Nottingham. Will, lots of celebrating going on, but the vaccination effort still happening.
Yes, good morning. For many people, Christmas and the period between and before often means getting to sit in front of the TV, watching TV shows and films that we've seen 1,000 times before, catching up with friends and families over this period where you get to see people that you haven't seen for a year, or in COVID's case, 2 years for many people. But there were thousands of staff, both paid professional and volunteers, who carried on working on the UK's booster programme. There was an expected 200,000 slots available over Christmas Eve, Christmas Day and Boxing Day alone. And now on Monday, the 27th, there's supposedly 1.5 million opportunities to get a booster vaccine before the start of the new year. Obviously, it's much more subdued than we've been seeing in the recent weeks. I think it was last week that we saw the record of the most vaccines given in a single day here in the UK. And while 1.5 million over the next week or so isn't necessarily the number that we've been seeing in the recent weeks, it shows the dedication from a lot of volunteers, paid professionals, and the government to use this time, this holiday that's so often used for relaxing, to continue the booster programme that's being badged and signalled as being the way that we can finally, hopefully, put this pandemic to bed.
Now, we know that people are about to start receiving text messages reminding them to get a boost if they haven't received those messages already. I'm frankly getting more messages from NHS no reply than I am my mum at the moment. But there's also been reports in newspapers about potential door-to-door vaccinations. What do we know about that?
Yes, of course. I was one of those people that received a text. It quite simply says, "Get boosted now." Getting a booster is the way that we can deal with this pandemic, and it's essential. But this one is a little bit more of a contentious subject. It's one thing being texted out of the blue, but it's another thing somebody coming to your door and asking if you've had a vaccination. Now, this is something that was reported in the Mail on Sunday at the weekend. It's a trial of doing door-to-door vaccinations, coming to people's door and saying, "Have you had the vaccine?" That kind of thing. It led to 150 people having the vaccination. Those are people that hadn't had any sort of vaccination. This scheme is particularly targeting hard-to-reach areas. This trial happened in Ipswich in Suffolk in East Anglia. Now, while there's no guarantees that it will be happening on your street anytime soon, it's certainly one of the options that the government is looking at to get that last 5 to 10 million people who haven't had any sort of vaccine, that targeted group that for a long time have been resistant. One of the things that I will say, while some people won't be happy with somebody coming to the door and saying it's time for you to get a vaccine, a lot of people would actually be significantly pleased to see somebody coming to the door, and there's a whole range of reasons that we can give for that. For example, digital isolation. A lot of people don't have a phone, a lot of people don't have a computer or an internet connection, so making that connection to have a vaccine isn't necessarily something easy that they can do, while obviously you do get the chance to sign up for a vaccine by going through the old-fashioned method, pen and paper. You might get a letter to your door. Not everybody receives their letter, and a lot of people might simply have the issue of disability, which means that they can't get out. So doing these door-to-door vaccines might be a way that a lot of people who just haven't had the opportunity to get a vaccine or a booster can do so. So as I said, this is just a trial at the moment, but we might see and hear more of this in the coming weeks as winter continues.
Sorry, and just to be clear about this, Will, they come to the door, or in this scheme in Ipswich, they've come to the door, they've inquired as to whether you may or may not have had a vaccine, and then do they then administer the vaccine there, and then if you haven't had it and you've perhaps changed your mind or wish to have it?
Yeah, it completely gives the opportunity to have a vaccine. I will say that the health and social care system does home-to-home appointments already, so there's nothing really too strange about having somebody come into your home and do a vaccine. It's just a new and different way to get that harder-to-reach group. We know that a lot of people might have just not been contacted in the right way or the most appropriate way for them, but it's just giving people an extra opportunity. Maybe people that would go into a walk-in centre if they were able to on that last minute. But I think a lot of it is the messaging, getting the message out there about those harder to reach groups, having those conversations. We know that from a long time in the pandemic, there was a lot of misinformation or what the government would call misinformation about the vaccines, what might be in it. There were certain groups that were harder to reach because they just didn't get the right information or were given false information, fake news about what's in the vaccine. And I think the government is here really trialling, having those conversations on the doorstep and then giving the people the opportunity to have a vaccine. Now, what I will stress is that the government isn't pushing in any way a mandatory vaccine programme that we know of yet. We know that in some parts of the world there is a mandatory vaccine programme, but that's not something that seems to be talked about in relation to this door-to-door opportunity to get a vaccine.
And as far as we can tell, we're going to be expecting, we think, to hear from the government perhaps later today on restrictions when the data blackout comes to an end. Is that right?
Yes, of course. So with all of the cases and vaccinations, we never get the data up to date on the day. So the data that we're currently looking at the moment is already a week or two, slightly under maybe a week, slightly under about a week and a half old. The last data that the NHS released was on the 24th, on Christmas Eve. There was 122,000 cases. I think it was around 30,000 of those COVID cases were related to Omicron in particular. So we are waiting for that data to be updated. Obviously, a lot of people have been mingling over Christmas, whether that's over the earlier periods of Christmas or maybe the later periods such as Boxing Day. And so those cases haven't quite been registered in the way that we'd expect. We know that throughout all of the pandemic, we're always a few days out based on the case levels. And a lot of people, they might not have their symptoms develop or their tests come back. PCR tests often take around 24 hours before you might get the results. So a lot of people won't have quite the number. So even if new data is released today and what we've been talking about, that the Prime Minister is going to be having his sage briefing from people like Patrick Vallance and Chris Whitty, even the data today is still going to be not quite up to date. And that's the thing that we're really looking for. I know that they're looking at particularly hospitalisations and how Omicron affects that sector of the healthcare system, as well as looking at the amount of people that might just get a little bit sick from this or have to take time off work, because that's the really serious thing. And I know that the government is looking at things like whether we're going to have to close schools and those sorts of considerations based on teacher absences. So there is a lot of more news coming out today around how Christmas might have affected the COVID rollout in the future.
Yeah, thank you for that, Will. Making friends with the pigeons there. They all flew off when he talks about door-to-door vaccinations. Did you see that? They flocked away before coming back.
Yeah.
People say that birds are prophetic.
There you go, possibly. By the way, we are expecting those new COVID figures during the course of the day. As soon as we have them, we'll bring them to you here on GB News. Let's go to Yorkshire next, to Doncaster, one of 39 towns hoping to become a city in 2022 to mark the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, Kevin Larkin, has been talking to businesses in the Yorkshire town, which hopes to become a city very soon.
It's been a year when Doncaster's motto has been useful, and it's an attitude shared by the town's leader.
Doncaster is still a great place to live, work and do business. We know our people are strong, dedicated, skilled, creative and resilient, and will do all they can to get back to where they need and want to be.
Doncaster, in a key red wall area of Yorkshire, has had some positive news this year, with a new cinema and a new library and museum opening. As businesses met before Christmas, they too were feeling positive.
We are primarily a mail order company. We've been absolutely rushed off our feet. So mentally, we're actually on the opposite side of the people that have been on furlough. So we've had no time off. We're just literally working. So it's for the business, it has been very good.
2021 has been absolutely amazing for our business. I think like a lot of businesses through COVID, we really took stock of what we were doing and how we were running, and we made changes to run more efficiently, and we've actually seen those rewards come through in 2021.
It's been an adventure. It's been a successful year. But if you would have asked us in March or April what type of year we would have had, we probably wouldn't have guessed that. But things came together. I think the business community really pulled together. I think the employees that we had worked incredibly hard to get us through it. And I think the programs that the government put in place did help.
But 2022 could be a bigger year as Doncaster bids for city status. It has a minster, a university. Now the hope is it will get the title to match and give Donny a boost.
I feel that it deserves it. There's so much inward investment and outward investment. I think the infrastructure's here, the rail network, the airport, obviously, which has got great scope. I generally think that its city status is what Doncaster deserves.
It will bring a lot more work, a lot more clout, and hopefully the government will need to then listen to the Doncaster Chamber of Commerce and other chambers in the north, because the levelling up process at the moment is a little bit, it depends which side of the levelling you are, because it's slightly uneven at the moment.
I think it would be absolutely amazing for the borough. You know, we need to help raise the aspirations year on year of our people, our place, our workforces, and city status would just help us do that.
The new president of Doncaster Chamber says 2022 could be Doncaster's year.
2022 looks okay at the moment, but that's on the basis that we don't have any unnecessary lockdowns. I think there's a possibility that if we overreact and we go too hard and too early, irrespective of what the Chancellor does, government support is all well and good, but businesses want to do business and they perform better when they're allowed to get on with it.
Well, good luck, Donny, I say. Now, coming up, Best of Talking Pints continues with the one and only Nigel Farage, but first of all, here's the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the